This is John Dollar of Prayer Builders in Winona, Minnesota. And I want to go ahead and look at this. Now, yesterday, if you were with us, we were looking at the miracle of the 5,000 and the young boy being involved. Now, when we originally looked at that teaching, that was in Matthew chapter 14. That's where Matthew chapter 14 from verse 15 down through verse 21 is where that miracle was. Well, if that wasn't enough, I mean, that had to stand out in Jesus' disciples' minds enough that it had to make a huge impression on them. Just that miracle. It was not that long after that this happened again. And see, sometimes when we sit here and read about the old stories and you think, wow, that was really awesome that happened back then. And then you just kind of think, well, that was just such a big, amazing thing. God doesn't do those kind of things too often. Well, it wasn't too many days later. It depends on if the need avails itself to us. And if God's got some faith. Jesus was training his disciples. I mean, we've already seen this. I mean, just remember this. When this occurred, remember, we started all this back in Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus sent his disciples out and he said, when you go out from city to city, don't take your gold, don't take your silver, don't take your money pouches, don't take your food backpacks, don't take anything. Go out and God's going to take care of you. And then we looked at the end of that, and he said, now, just before the Garden of Gethsemane, back in Luke chapter 22, he said, when you was out, and I sent you forth, and every time you went forth, were you ever without anything? Was there ever a time where you were lacking? And they said, no, there was never a time we were lacking. God took care of them. God will take care of us. Well, not too far after what happened in Luke chapter 14 or in Matthew chapter 14, if you turn over into the next chapter in Matthew chapter 15, you're going to see the miracle of the 5,000. And when you read this, it's going to be kind of like deja vu. It's like some people, you might have questions. You read these Bible stories, and if you ask the question, can God do this again? Can God do those miracles again? Well, right here, he is showing us an example that he can do these miracles again. And he's not a bit shy to repeat it in your lifetime. God will do the same miracles over and over if that's what's necessary. And it does not matter. I don't care if he has met your needs 100 times. He'll meet your needs 1,000 times more if you have faith. And if you are turned on. So let's go and let's just read this. In Matthew chapter 15, I just want to go ahead and read this. It says, now when Jesus called his disciples, this is down in verse 32 of Matthew chapter 15. It says, when Jesus called his disciples to himself, he said, I have compassion on this multitude. Here again, there's a whole bunch of people following him. People have been getting healed. And down in verse 32, he says, I have compassion on this multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. But I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. Then his disciples said to him, where could we go get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And a few little fish. And then Jesus took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks and broke them and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. And they all ate, and they were all filled, and they took up 7 large baskets full of fragments that were left. Now those who ate were about 4,000 men, besides women and children. So you're looking at that same massive thing. If there was 4,000 men, there might have been 8,000 women. And then who knows how many children. And then you're going to be right back up 4,000 and 8,000 and be 12,000. We were probably somewhere up between 10 and 20,000 at least. So there's all these people. God did this again. And I am sure it didn't say it here. We had looked at yesterday how Jesus tested Philip when he was asking him about what do you think we should do here to feed these people? And Jesus was just testing Philip. Well, what he was doing was testing his faith. We looked at that yesterday. But now this has all happened again. And I am sure that when Jesus said to his disciples in verse 33, when he said, "Where could we get enough bread in the wilderness?" Or no, his disciples said to him, "Where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude?" It's like you're seeing they hadn't fully learned the lesson yet from the first time. They were thinking, how can we feed all these people? I don't know. If I was there, now maybe the difference is because I'm born again and they weren't. But I would have been thinking, I would have been saying, okay. I don't know. Whoever it was that said this, I would have been looking over at him. Don't you just remember what just happened a few days ago? I mean, we just fed 5,000. I mean, I had to help carry one of those baskets all the way home for that little kid. I mean, I was having to do all this. I had to collect all this. I mean, we've already been down this road before. And do you know what? That's where my life, I'll tell you what, right now, sometimes I've looked at my life, and sometimes God, my needs sometimes have always been just met. It's almost like I believe God wants abundance in our lives, but and my wife and I have always been pretty severe givers. I mean, we would give in situations that it was like the consequences almost seemed dire and severe because many times we gave everything we had. God would move me to empty my bank account just to bless someone. And every time that happened, boom, money would come. And money would come usually pretty quickly. And we would usually have a number of fold more. We might have 2 or 3 times what we had just given away within a day or so. Just supernatural stuff would always happen. But it was never like I got to this place where where the rafters were full of money. It was like Anita and I, it's like we've lived in this place where we were just like sustained. But some of this now, I am not afraid to go through anything. I've had to start over so many times that if this whole economy collapsed, and if the dollar just went south and if there was no dollar anymore, if it was just like cryptocurrency or digital currency and I had nothing. I mean, if everything just folded, or if there was a famine and there was like no food, you go into Walmart and there's no food. Starting over again wouldn't bother. I mean, it would bother me. It's kind of painful to your flesh when you have to start over again. But I have been down this road so many times, and Jesus was taking them through this. Sometimes these repeated lessons. It's like practice makes perfect, you know. You just got to keep walking this life of faith and learning. And every time God meets a need, and every time he meets a need, and every time he meets a need. And if I'm in a place where it's tough and I got to start over, it seems like I'm believing from the beginning again. I just will, to encourage myself, I don't know how many times I have told my wife, Anita, we've had to start over so many times. And I have ended up telling my wife, I have said, Anita, God has taken care of us 1,000 times. And I will start telling her stories. Remember when he did this, and remember when he did this, and remember when he did this. And okay, he is not going to change. If he took care of us then, we're going to see him do it now. He is faithful. He is always going to take care of us no matter what happens. And I don't care if we're in the last of the last days and there's famines, wars and rumors of wars and all kind of things, pandemics, epidemics, anything you can think of going on, and we got all this stuff happening. God's going to take care of us. This repetition, this was stuff that was getting those disciples ready, getting their faith stretched. And it's like just being in a situation that no matter how bleak it looks, you know God's going to take care of you. So he went through there and walked them through this, and then look at this. It said, and he took the 7 loaves in verse 36, and the fish, and gave thanks, and broke them, and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 7 large baskets full of fragments that were left. Now those who ate were 4,000 besides the women and children. And he sent away the multitude. He got into the boat, and he went to the region of Magdala. So this whole miracle had happened again. And I think whenever God does stuff, it wasn't just a matter of feeding the people. That was probably the primary thing. Jesus didn't want Jesus wanted his people. God was wanting his people fed. And see, what was so awesome is like sometimes we think there's a disconnect between us and heaven, unless we're just praying. But did you know God's always concerned about you? He just always cares about you. Cares about your needs being taken care of. When Jesus saw we need to feed this multitude, that thought did not originate in Jesus. That thought originated in heaven. And then there was a receiver on earth who was Jesus that was able to pick up on the signal of what heaven was wanting to do, which is take care of people. And then, this whole thing. I mean, you just got to remember this. Jesus was like saying, and that's why when you look at these examples, God's not wanting us to just be the disciples in this scenario. He's wanting us to be like Jesus. He's wanting us to be the receiver like Jesus and be hearing and seeing what God's wanting to do in the earth, just like Jesus was right here. He's wanting us to be like him. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this up. We're going to look at another miracle where God supernaturally met provision tomorrow. So tune in then. And if you got questions, hook up in here. Ask questions, however you're seeing this. Give comments, ask questions, do what you want. We will respond to those. And I'm just so thankful that you found us here on whatever form of media that you found us. And I just want to remind you as we're closing today, no matter what is happening, do not forget it. Jesus is coming back.